How do you sort out the so-called jargon from real-world practices that work? Do the members of your organization find some business or technology advice utterly confusing? Welcome to Real Talk with Sam Holcman. In this program, we set the record straight, and in terms that business people and technology people can understand. Now, here is your host, Sam Holcman.
Welcome to this edition of Real Talk. I'm Sam Holcman. Thanks for joining me again in our broadcasts that talk about technology, business, strategy, and in this particular episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about artificial intelligence. And I put a title on this particular broadcast, Beyond the AI Algorithm, Rediscovering Authentic Learning and Best Practices. That title has a distinct meaning that we hope to bring to our audience, and that is, quite directly, best practices are not on the internet, and best practices with a high degree of confidence on our side are not in artificial intelligence engines. And that's because the simple fact that real best practices are not something that you get for free. Think about it in your own organization. Would your organization allow their best practices to be put on the internet for everyone else to use? Well, of course not. It doesn't make any sense. So what I want to bring to you is the recognition of the four types of data that are out there and the limitations that the artificial intelligence are seeing right now in that data. The first class of data we call generalized data that's on the internet. And as I always joke, one of the great things about the internet is anybody can write anything about anything, and one of the problems with the internet is anybody can write anything about anything. And that's one of the major sources of training for artificial intelligence engines. The second one is quite frustrating to us and a lot of other people. And that's what we call intellectual property theft. Intellectual property theft. That is the use by these AI engines of copyrighted or trademarked information without proper compensation or recognition, specifically compensation. This is just essentially theft. Yet it keeps going on, which is kind of amazing to me. And the industry and those behind it need to be taken to task on these things, because we, the people that actually generate intellectual property, are being hurt by this. Now, even if we ignore those two categories for just a moment and the theft that's going on, what I want to bring to you is the recognition that even their best practices aren't available to these AI engines to train on. What is the third category of information? It's we call an equal exchange of value. For example, if someone is looking for an article on our websites, what we ask them for is a real, legitimate email. Now, what do we mean by that? If they send us an email and it turns out to be incorrect through our algorithms and the tools that we use to check those emails, they don't get the article sent to them. In other words, we can't respond to a phony email because it's a phony email, and they won't get the link to that particular information. So we call that equal exchange. The AI engines don't have that ability to inquire and respond to that particular situation. Now, category number 4, that's best practices. And best practices, bluntly, cost money. So when it comes to, for example, the information that we provide to our stakeholders in enterprise architecture or business architecture or soft skills through our workshops, training, seminars, and consulting, that's all behind if you want to call it a firewall or paywall or whatever you'd like to call it that's there. And once again, that's where the real best practices are. They are not on the internet. They will never be on the internet. And therefore, what you and I have to recognize is what we're getting on the internet is published practices that have no vetting or no, essentially, credibility. So as the old phrase goes, caveat emptor, buyer beware. Let's get this industry on the right track by compensating people for their intellectual property, vetting that information, and as you'll see in upcoming broadcasts, there are ways to address this in your own organization. And it's what we call EAI, Enterprise Augmented Information. It's you using the power of these very, very powerful technology components, the engine essentially, the processing engine, on your own best practices, vetted data. What I find fascinating is we've been talking about this for quite some time, and now the industry has coined a new term. And what's that term? Small language models. We still like the phrase EAI, Enterprise Augmented Information. Thanks for listening, and until next time, let's look at authentic learning and best practices for all of us.
Thank you for tuning in to Real Talk. Be sure to join your host, Sam Holcman, again for another edition of our program. We'll have more real topics of discussion then.